Imagine for a moment that you could compress the entire 4.5 billion year history of our planet into a single day. If Earth formed at midnight, life would appear around 4 a.m., but you wouldn't see anything moving with the naked eye until 9 p.m. Dinosaurs would show up at 10:40 p.m., and humans? We'd arrive at 11:59 and 56 seconds. For seconds before midnight. That's how new we are to this ancient story, and yet, we're the only species that can look back and understand the breathtaking journey that brought us here. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see every living thing around you, from the bacteria in your gut to the birds outside your window. This is the story of how life conquered an entire planet, survived 5 mass extinctions, and produced creatures so bizarre that if we found them on another world, we'd think we were hallucinating. And here's the most mind-blowing part. You carry the evidence of this entire journey in every single cell of your body. Before we dive into this epic adventure, if you're as fascinated by science and the mysteries of our world as I am, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I promise you, by the end of this journey through time, you'll never look at life the same way again. And trust me, you'll want to share this story with everyone you know because it's not just the history of life, it's your history, written in DNA and stone. Let's start at the beginning, not with a whimper, but with the most violent event you can imagine. 4.5 billion years ago, our solar system was a demolition derby of rocks smashing into each other at tens of thousands of miles per hour. Earth formed from this chaos, a molten ball of rock that would have vaporized any modern life form instantly. The surface temperature exceeded 1,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt rock into glowing rivers of lava. But here's where it gets interesting. Within just 100 million years, a blink of an eye in geological time, Earth had cooled enough to form a solid crust and, crucially, liquid water. Scientists call this period the Hadean Eon, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, and for good reason. Massive asteroids, some the size of Texas, continued to pummel our planet. One of these impacts was so catastrophic it literally tore a chunk out of Earth and created the moon. Think about that. The moon you see tonight is debris from Earth's violent childhood. But these hellish conditions didn't prevent life from emerging. In fact, they might have been necessary for it. The first signs of life appeared surprisingly early, possibly as far back as 4.1 billion years ago. We know this from tiny crystals called zircons found in Australia that contain carbon isotopes with a signature that suggests biological activity. Life didn't wait for perfect conditions. It emerged while Earth was still being bombarded by asteroids. This tells us something profound. Life isn't fragile, it's incredibly tenacious, maybe even inevitable given the right ingredients. But what were those ingredients? Water, obviously, but also organic molecules like amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Many of these organic molecules didn't form on Earth. They came from space. Meteorites called carbonaceous chondrites, which still fall to Earth today, contain over 70 different amino acids. Some scientists believe that Earth was literally seeded with the ingredients for life from outer space. You are, in a very real sense, made of stardust, not metaphorically, but literally constructed from atoms forged in the hearts of dying stars and delivered to Earth by cosmic courier service. The earliest life forms were simple, single-celled organisms without nuclei, what we call prokaryotes. These included bacteria and archaea, organisms so successful that they still dominate Earth today in terms of sheer numbers and biomass. If you could see all the bacteria on Earth at once, their combined weight would be greater than all plants and animals combined. They were the pioneers, the colonizers of a hostile world, and they transformed it completely. Around 3.5 billion years ago, something revolutionary happened. Some bacteria developed the ability to photosynthesize, to capture energy from sunlight and use it to make food from carbon dioxide and water. The evidence for this comes from structures called stromatolites, layered rock formations created by ancient bacterial mats. You can still see living stromatolites today in places like Shark Bay, Australia. They're literally living fossils, unchanged for billions of years. But early photosynthesis was different from what plants do today. It didn't produce oxygen. Instead, these bacteria used hydrogen sulfide or iron as electron donors. The oceans of early Earth were rich in dissolved iron, giving them a green tinge rather than the blue we see today. For nearly 1 billion years, life thrived in this oxygen-free world. In fact, oxygen would have been toxic to most early life forms. It's a highly reactive gas that damages organic molecules. Then, around 2.4 billion years ago, a group of bacteria called cyanobacteria evolved a new type of photosynthesis that did produce oxygen as a waste product. This might seem like a minor innovation, but it was about to cause the first great extinction event in Earth's history and completely transform our planet. The Great Oxidation Event, as scientists call it, was essentially biological pollution on a planetary scale. As oxygen built up in the atmosphere, it was catastrophic for anaerobic organisms, those that lived without oxygen. Imagine if the air suddenly became filled with chlorine gas. That's what oxygen was like for early life. This event killed off possibly 99% of all life on Earth. But it also set the stage for everything that followed. Oxygen is rocket fuel for metabolism. Organisms that could use oxygen could extract far more energy from their food. This extra energy would eventually make possible larger, more complex life forms, including, eventually, the Great Oxidation Event had another profound effect. Oxygen in the upper atmosphere formed the ozone layer, which shields Earth's surface from deadly ultraviolet radiation. For the first time in Earth's history, life could potentially survive on land. But that invasion would have to wait. First, life had another major innovation to achieve. For about 1 billion years after the Great Oxidation Event, not much seemed to happen. Scientists call this the boring billion, a period of apparent evolutionary stagnation. But appearances can be deceiving. During this time, one of the most important events in the history of life occurred: the evolution of eukaryotic cells, cells with nuclei and other internal compartments. The story of how this happened is absolutely wild. Around 1.5 billion years ago, one cell engulfed another, but instead of digesting it, they formed a partnership. The engulfed cell became the mitochondrion, the powerhouse of the cell. This wasn't a one-time event, it happened at least twice. A similar process gave rise to chloroplasts in plant cells. This means that you, right now, are not really an individual organism but a community. Every one of your cells contains descendants of ancient bacteria that joined forces billions of years ago. Your mitochondria even have their own DNA, separate from your nuclear DNA, inherited only from your mother. This partnership was revolutionary because mitochondria are incredibly efficient at producing energy using oxygen. A eukaryotic cell with mitochondria can produce 15 times more energy than a prokaryotic cell of the same size. This energy surplus allowed eukaryotic cells to grow larger and develop complex internal structures. It was like upgrading from a bicycle to a jet engine. Around 1.5 billion years ago, another game-changing innovation appeared: sexual reproduction. Before this, organisms reproduced by simply splitting in two, creating identical copies of themselves. Sexual reproduction mixed DNA from two parents, creating offspring with new combinations of genes. This dramatically sped up evolution because beneficial mutations could spread through populations much faster. It also allowed organisms to adapt more quickly to changing environments. But sex came with a terrible price: death. When organisms reproduced asexually, They were essentially immortal, continuing indefinitely through their identical offspring. Sexual reproduction created distinct generations, parents and offspring, and with that distinction came programmed aging and death. Every multicellular organism that reproduces sexually, including humans, carries this ancient bargain in their genes: the power to create unique offspring in exchange for a finite lifespan. For another billion years, all life remained single-celled, though these cells were becoming increasingly complex. Then, around 600 million years ago, something extraordinary happened. Cells began sticking together, forming the first multicellular organisms. This might seem like a simple change, but it required cells to do something that goes against their fundamental drive to reproduce. Some cells had to sacrifice their ability to reproduce for the good of the organism. This is the origin of altruism at the cellular level. The first multicellular organisms were weird by any standard. The Ediacaran fauna, named after the Ediacara Hills in Australia where they were first discovered, looked like quilted mattresses, fronds, and discs. Dickinsonia, one of the most famous, looked like a ribbed oval placemat up to 5 feet long. These creatures had no mouths, no guts, no obvious way of moving. They probably absorbed nutrients directly through their skin. They were evolution's first experiment with large body size, and while they were successful for a time, they would soon be swept away by a biological revolution. 540 million years ago, life exploded. The Cambrian explosion, as it's known, saw the sudden appearance of almost every major animal body plan that exists today. In just 20 million years, an evolutionary instant, the seas filled with creatures that had eyes, shells, spines, legs, antennae, and jaws. It was as if evolution had been saving up ideas for billions of years and then released them all at once. The star of the Cambrian period was the trilobite, an armored arthropod with compound eyes made of calcite crystals. Some trilobites had eyes with 15,000 lenses. Imagine seeing the world through 15,000 tiny windows simultaneously. But the Cambrian seas also hosted creatures that seem like they came from an alien world. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a long, flexible proboscis with a claw at the end. Anomalocaris, the first apex predator, was a 6-foot-long shrimp-like creature with grasping arms and a circular mouth lined with teeth. Hallucigenia was so bizarre that scientists initially reconstructed it upside down, mistaking its spines for legs. The Cambrian explosion also saw the evolution of our own distant ancestors. Pikaia, a small, worm-like creature about 2 inches long, had a primitive notochord, the precursor to a backbone. It doesn't look like much, but this humble creature carried the blueprint for every vertebrate that would ever live, from sharks to sparrows to humans. But why did the Cambrian explosion happen when it did? Scientists have proposed many theories. Oxygen levels had finally risen high enough to support active, mobile animals. The evolution of eyes triggered an evolutionary arms race between predators and prey. The development of shells and hard parts allowed animals to grow larger and more complex. Whatever the cause, the Cambrian explosion set the stage for the next 500 million years of animal evolution. Life's colonization of land began not with animals but with simple algae and fungi, probably around 500 million years ago. These pioneers faced enormous challenges. Water provides support, but on land, organisms need rigid structures to stand upright. Water prevents desiccation, but land organisms need waterproof coverings. Water carries sperm to eggs, but land organisms need new ways to reproduce. The first land plants evolved from green algae around 450 million years ago. These were simple, moss-like organisms that hugged the ground and still needed water for reproduction. But they had one crucial adaptation, a waxy cuticle that prevented them from drying out. This might seem like a small innovation, but it was the key that unlocked an entire new world for life to colonize. Plants faced a fundamental challenge on land: how to transport water from the soil to their above-ground parts. Around 425 million years ago, they evolved vascular tissue, essentially plumbing that could move water and nutrients throughout the plant body. This allowed plants to grow taller, reaching for the sun. The first vascular plants were still small, rarely exceeding a foot in height, but they were the ancestors of every tree, flower, and blade of grass alive today. The colonization of land by plants changed everything. They weathered rock into soil, created shade and shelter, and pumped oxygen into the atmosphere. They also created a new resource that had never existed before: terrestrial organic matter. This set the stage for animals to follow plants onto land. The first animals to venture onto land were arthropods, the ancestors of insects, spiders, and scorpions. We know this from trackways preserved in 450-million-year-old rocks. These early pioneers probably spent most of their time in water, making brief forays onto land to escape predators or search for food. They could breathe air through simple openings in their exoskeletons, but they still needed to keep their bodies moist. Around 400 million years ago, the first vertebrates began to explore the land. These were lobe-finned fish with sturdy fins that could support their weight. Tiktaalik, discovered in the Canadian Arctic in 2004, is a perfect transitional fossil. It had fish-like scales and gills, but also lungs, a mobile neck, and fins with wrist-like joints. It could do push-ups. This 375-million-year-old creature shows us the moment when our ancestors were literally learning to walk. The first true tetrapods, four-limbed vertebrates, appeared around 365 million years ago. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega had 4 limbs with digits, but they were still primarily aquatic. Their limbs were probably used for navigating through shallow, weed-choked waters rather than walking on land. It would take millions more years before vertebrates fully committed to terrestrial life. Meanwhile, plants were undergoing their own revolution. Around 385 million years ago, the first trees appeared. Archaeopteryx, despite its name suggesting a relationship to the famous feathered dinosaur, was actually a tree that could grow 100 feet tall. It had a woody trunk, large root system, and fern-like leaves. Forests were born, and with them came new ecosystems with multiple layers: canopy, understory, and forest floor, each with its own communities of organisms. The Carboniferous period, beginning 359 million years ago, saw forests dominate the land for the first time. These weren't like modern forests. They were dominated by giant club mosses and horsetails that could grow 100 feet tall, and tree ferns with trunks 6 feet in diameter. The atmosphere contained 35% oxygen, compared to 21% today, allowing insects to grow to enormous sizes. Meganeura, a dragonfly relative, had a wingspan of over 2 feet. Arthropleura, a millipede relative, grew 8 feet long and was the largest land invertebrate that ever lived. These Carboniferous forests were so productive that they pulled massive amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and locked it away in their tissues. When these plants died, they often fell into swampy water where they couldn't fully decompose. Over millions of years, they were compressed into coal. The coal we burn today is literally fossilized sunlight captured by forests 300 million years ago. When we burn coal, we're releasing carbon that's been locked away since before the dinosaurs existed. The first reptiles evolved around 312 million years ago. They had a crucial innovation: the amniotic egg, with a shell and internal membranes that created a private pond for the developing embryo. This freed vertebrates from their dependence on water for reproduction. Reptiles could now colonize dry environments far from any water source. It was as revolutionary as the spacesuit, allowing life to explore previously uninhabitable territories. Around 299 million years ago, the supercontinent Pangaea formed, bringing all of Earth's landmasses together into one giant continent. This had profound effects on climate and evolution. The interior of Pangaea became extremely arid, creating vast deserts. Coastal areas experienced massive monsoons. These extreme conditions drove evolutionary innovation as organisms adapted to new challenges. The Permian period, beginning 299 million years ago, saw the rise of the synapsids, the mammal-like reptiles that were our own distant ancestors. Dimetrodon, with its distinctive sail back, is often mistaken for a dinosaur, but it was actually more closely related to mammals. These creatures dominated terrestrial ecosystems for millions of years. Some, like gorgonopsids, were fearsome predators with saber teeth. Others, like dicynodonts, were herbivores with turtle-like beaks. Then, 252 million years ago, came the apocalypse. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, also known as the Great Dying, was the closest life has ever come to complete annihilation. 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates went extinct. Forests disappeared, replaced by fungi feeding on dead trees. The oceans became acidic and depleted of oxygen. It took life 10 million years to fully recover. The cause was massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. These eruptions released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and methane, causing extreme global warming. Temperatures rose by 10 degrees Celsius. The oceans became stratified, with no mixing between surface and deep waters, creating vast dead zones. Hydrogen sulfide, produced by anaerobic bacteria, poisoned the atmosphere. The sky might have turned green from sulfur compounds. It was hell on Earth. But from this devastation came opportunity. The few survivors found themselves in a world with few competitors. Among these survivors was a group of reptiles called archosaurs. Within 20 million years of the extinction, archosaurs had diversified into two main lineages, one that would produce crocodiles and dinosaurs, and another that would lead to pterosaurs and eventually birds. The first dinosaurs appeared around 231 million years ago. They were small, bipedal creatures no bigger than a large dog. A raptor, one of the earliest known dinosaurs, was only 3 feet long and weighed about 20 pounds. These early dinosaurs were not the dominant land animals. That role belonged to various groups of large reptiles like Aetosaur and Rauisuchians. But dinosaurs had several advantages. They were fast, had upright postures that allowed efficient movement, and many were omnivorous, able to exploit various food sources. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction event 201 million years ago eliminated most of dinosaurs' competition. The cause was probably massive volcanism associated with the breakup of Pangaea. With their rivals gone, dinosaurs rapidly diversified and increased in size. By the Middle Jurassic, 170 million years ago, the Age of Giants had begun. Sauropods, the long-necked dinosaurs, became the largest animals ever to walk the Earth. Argentinosaurus may have weighed 100 tons and measured 115 feet long. These creatures were living skyscrapers, with hearts that had to pump blood up 30-foot necks to reach their brains. They had air sacs throughout their bodies, like birds, making their massive bones lighter while maintaining strength. Their long necks allowed them to browse vegetation over huge areas without moving their massive bodies. The Jurassic also saw the evolution of the first birds. Archaeopteryx, living 150 million years ago, had feathers, wings, and a wishbone like modern birds, but also teeth, claws on its wings, and a long, bony tail like a dinosaur. It was a perfect transitional form, showing that birds are literally living dinosaurs. But Archaeopteryx wasn't the only feathered dinosaur. We now know that many dinosaur species had feathers, from simple filaments to complex flight feathers. Tyrannosaurus rex babies might have been covered in fuzzy down. The breakup of Pangaea during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods created new opportunities for evolution. As continents drifted apart, populations became isolated and evolved independently. This is why different continents today have such distinct faunas. Marsupials dominated Australia, lemurs conquered Madagascar, and placental mammals diversified across the northern continents. The Cretaceous period, beginning 145 million years ago, saw one of the most important evolutionary innovations in plant history: flowers. The first flowering plants, or angiosperms, appeared around 130 million years ago. They had a secret weapon, double fertilization, which produced not just an embryo but also a food supply for it. This made their seeds more likely to survive and germinate. Flowers also recruited animals as pollinators, creating one of the most important partnerships in nature. In exchange for nectar, insects, birds, and even some mammals carried pollen from flower to flower. This coevolution produced extraordinary specializations. Some orchids evolved flowers that look and smell like female wasps to trick males into mating with them. The Madagascar star orchid has a nectar tube 11 inches long, pollinated only by a moth with an equally long proboscis. The success of flowering plants transformed terrestrial ecosystems. They diversified rapidly, producing fruits that animals would eat and disperse. Grasses evolved around 55 million years ago, creating vast new habitats, savannas and prairies, that would shape the evolution of many mammal groups, including our own ancestors. Marine ecosystems during the Mesozoic era were equally spectacular. The seas were ruled by marine reptiles: ichthyosaurs that looked like dolphins but were reptiles, plesiosaurs with impossibly long necks, and mosasaurs that could grow 50 feet long. The air above was dominated by pterosaurs, which weren't dinosaurs but flying reptiles. Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan of 36 feet, making it the largest flying animal ever known. Then, 66 million years ago, it all ended in a single day. An asteroid 6 miles wide slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula at 45,000 miles per hour. The impact released energy equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. The blast wave killed everything within 1,000 miles instantly. Massive earthquakes, 1,000 times stronger than anything recorded in human history, shook the entire planet. Tsunamis 300 feet high swept across the oceans. But the worst was yet to come. Debris ejected into space rained back down as billions of white-hot meteors, heating the atmosphere to oven temperatures. Forests ignited worldwide. Any animal that couldn't shelter underground or underwater was cooked alive. Then came the impact winter. Dust and smoke blocked out the sun for months. Photosynthesis stopped. Global temperatures plummeted. Acid rain, created when impact debris reacted with atmospheric water, poisoned lakes and streams. When the dust settled, 75% of all species were extinct. All non-avian dinosaurs were gone. No land animal weighing more than 55 pounds survived. But some did survive, hidden in burrows, seeds, and eggs. Among them were small, furry creatures that had lived in the shadows of dinosaurs for over 100 million years: mammals. The extinction of the dinosaurs was mammals' opportunity. Within 10 million years, they had diversified into forms that filled every ecological niche dinosaurs had occupied and many they hadn't. Some returned to the sea, evolving into whales. Others took to the air as bats. Some became giants like Paraceratherium, a hornless rhinoceros that stood 16 feet tall at the shoulder. Others remained small but evolved remarkable abilities, like echolocation in shrews and bats. The Cenozoic era, our current era, has been a time of remarkable climate change and evolutionary adaptation. Antarctica, once covered in forests where dinosaurs roamed, froze over. Ice ages came and went. The rise of the Himalayas and Andes changed global weather patterns. The formation of the Isthmus of Panama 3 million years ago connected North and South America, allowing the Great American Biotic Interchange, armadillos and possums moving north, cats and bears moving south. Grasses became increasingly important during the Cenozoic, and mammals evolved to exploit them. Horses evolved from small, forest-dwelling browsers to large, grassland grazers with high-crowned teeth adapted for grinding tough grass. Their legs became longer and more specialized for running, and they reduced their toes from 4 to 1, the hoof. You can trace this entire evolutionary sequence through fossils, a perfect example of evolution in action. Whales provide another extraordinary example of evolution. 50 million years ago, their ancestors were wolf-sized land mammals called Pachycetus that hunted in shallow waters. Over the next 15 million years, they evolved through forms like Ambulocetus, the walking whale, and Basilosaurus, which had tiny hind legs, into fully aquatic creatures. Modern whales still carry the genes for making legs, they're just switched off. Occasionally, these genes get switched back on, and a whale is born with small external legs, a throwback to their terrestrial ancestry. Perhaps the most important evolutionary story of the Cenozoic is our own. 7 million years ago, our lineage split from that of chimpanzees. The first hominins were apes that walked upright but had brains no larger than a chimp's. Walking upright freed their hands for carrying and tool use, and may have been an adaptation to climate change as forests gave way to grasslands in Africa. Around 2.8 million years ago, our ancestors began making stone tools. This might seem primitive, but it represented a cognitive revolution. Making even a simple stone tool requires planning, understanding of materials, and the ability to envision something that doesn't yet exist. Tool use created a feedback loop. Better tools meant better nutrition, which supported larger brains, which could make better tools. Homo erectus, appearing 1.9 million years ago, was the first hominin to look somewhat like us, tall, with long legs adapted for walking and running. They were the first to leave Africa, spreading across Asia and Europe. They controlled fire, which allowed them to cook food, making more calories available to support their growing brains. Cooking also allowed them to spend less time chewing and digesting, freeing up energy for other activities. But Homo erectus wasn't alone. Evolution produced multiple human species. Neanderthals evolved in Europe and Western Asia, adapted to cold climates with stocky bodies and large noses to warm frigid air. Denisovans lived in Asia. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed hobbits, stood only 3 feet tall and lived on Indonesian islands until perhaps 50,000 years ago. Homo naledi in South Africa had a curious mix of primitive and advanced features. Our own species, Homo sapiens, appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago. But for most of our history, we were just one human species among several. We coexisted with Neanderthals for thousands of years. We even interbred with them. If you have European or Asian ancestry, about 2% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals. We also carry Denisovan DNA, especially people from Melanesia and Australia. What made Homo sapiens special? Our brains weren't necessarily bigger than Neanderthals, but they might have been wired differently. We developed complex language, allowing us to share information and coordinate in large groups. We created art, music, and religion, evidence of symbolic thinking that seems unique to our species. Cave paintings in Indonesia and France, dating back 40,000 years, show not just artistic skill but the ability to represent ideas and tell stories. Around 50,000 years ago, something changed. Archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Suddenly, our ancestors were making complex tools, jewelry, and art. They were burying their dead with grave goods, suggesting belief in an afterlife. They were trading over long distances. This cultural explosion might have been triggered by a genetic mutation that enhanced our language abilities, or it might have been a cultural innovation that spread rapidly. By 45,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia, requiring sophisticated boats and navigation skills. By 15,000 years ago, we had crossed the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. We spread across the planet faster than any large animal ever had, adapting to every environment from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests to remote islands. Everywhere humans went, large animals went extinct. Australia lost its giant kangaroos and wombats the size of rhinos. North America lost its mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. This wasn't coincidence, we were likely the cause. We were such effective hunters that we drove many species to extinction before we even invented agriculture. The invention of agriculture 10,000 years ago changed everything again. Instead of following herds and gathering wild plants, we began controlling our food supply. This allowed populations to grow and settlements to become permanent. But agriculture also had downsides. Our diet became less diverse. Living in close quarters with animals allowed diseases to jump from them to us. Social hierarchies developed as some people accumulated more resources than others. Agriculture also began humanity's transformation of the planet. We cleared forests, diverted rivers, and selectively bred plants and animals until they bore little resemblance to their wild ancestors. A modern corn cob is 1,000 times larger than its ancestor, teosinte. We've turned wolves into everything from Chihuahuas to Great Danes through artificial selection. The past 500 years have seen an acceleration of human impact that's difficult to comprehend. When Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, the world's human population was about 460 million. Today, it's over 8 billion. We've added more people in the last 50 years than existed in all of human history before 1800. Our impact on other species has been catastrophic. We're currently causing the sixth mass extinction. Species are going extinct at 100 to 1,000 times the natural background rate. We've destroyed half of the world's tropical rainforests. We've created dead zones in the oceans. We've filled the atmosphere with enough carbon dioxide to change the climate. But here's what's remarkable. We're the first species in Earth's history to understand what we're doing. We can see our impact, understand the consequences, and choose to change. We've brought species back from the brink of extinction. We've created protected areas covering 15% of Earth's land surface. We're developing renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and even considering how to bring extinct species back to life. The story of life on Earth isn't finished. We're writing the next chapter right now. Every decision we make, from what we eat to how we travel to how we vote, shapes the future of life on our planet. We stand at a unique moment in Earth's history, with the power to destroy or preserve the incredible diversity of life that took 3.8 billion years to evolve. Consider this. You are the product of an unbroken chain of successful reproduction stretching back 3.8 billion years. Every one of your ancestors, from the first self-replicating molecule to your parents, survived long enough to reproduce. You carry in your DNA the solutions to billions of years of challenges. Your eyes use the same light-detecting proteins that evolved in bacteria billions of years ago. Your hiccups are a remnant of the breathing pattern of your fish ancestors. Your goosebumps are what's left of the reflex that fluffed up your mammalian ancestors' fur for warmth or to look bigger to predators. Understanding the history of life gives us perspective on our place in the universe. We're not separate from nature, we're part of it, connected to every living thing through our shared evolutionary history. The bacteria in your gut, the plants that produce your oxygen, the insects that pollinate your food, they're all your relatives, part of the same grand family tree. This knowledge comes with responsibility. We're the only species that can appreciate the beauty and complexity of life's history. We're the only ones who can ensure its future. The next time you see a bird, remember it's a dinosaur that survived a mass extinction. When you see a flower, think of the 130 million year partnership between plants and pollinators. When you look in the mirror, see the survivor of 5 mass extinctions, the heir to billions of years of evolution. The history of life on Earth is not just a story about the past, it's a guide to the future. It shows us that life is resilient but not indestructible. It demonstrates that cooperation from the first eukaryotic cells to human societies has been key to life's greatest successes. It proves that diversity is strength, that extinction is forever, and that small changes can have enormous consequences over time. As we face challenges like climate change, habitat loss, and potential pandemics, we can learn from life's history. Mass extinctions have happened before, but life has always recovered, often in new and extraordinary ways. The question is not whether life will survive, it will. The question is whether we'll be part of that future, and what kind of world we'll leave for the generations that come after us. This is your story, written in stone and DNA, in fossils and living creatures. It's a story of triumph against impossible odds, of creativity in the face of challenges, of the relentless drive of life to survive and thrive. You are part of this story, and you have the power to influence how it continues. The history of life on Earth isn't just something that happened, it's something that's happening right now, with you as one of its authors.